In this episode, we're going to add a login with a service button to our website. So this is where you see buttons that say sign up with Facebook or sign up with Google. So we can use any one of those services, and the one that I'm going to demonstrate is GitHub, but the process for doing a login with Facebook or Google is just pretty much the same, other than you have to set up the application with either Facebook or Google. And you also use the gem for that specific service. So we're going to get started by logging into GitHub and going to the settings. Now, if you go down here, you can get to your settings, and after you're on your settings, you can see this developer settings right here. And then click on OAuth apps, and we want to register a new application. So we would put our application here, and the homepage URL, and I'm developing on my local machine, so I would do this. You would probably replace this if you're developing on Cloud 9 with the homepage URL as you're developing. And now the callback needs to be this. So we'll put in our same URL. And again, if you're developing on like Cloud 9, you probably put your base URL right here, and then do /auth/github/callback. And make sure you spell everything right, and then register the application. And once you register the application, you're going to get a client ID and client secret. For security, I've grayed mine out, but you just copy and paste those into the same spot in your code that I'll do that. Now in our gem file, we need to add the gem that's going to do this. And we're going to use the OmniOff Gem. So you probably want to search for that, maybe read some of the documentation to figure out what's going on. And also be sure that you pay attention to class to figure out what all of this OAuth is and how it works and how the gem integrates with that. So we're going to go ahead and add OmniAuth-GitHub. And again, if you're using some other service like Facebook, you do OmniAuth-Facebook. So there's lots of different strategies. If you go to OmniAuth's website on GitHub, and you'll see the different strategies that you can use. So we're going to add that gem, and then we're going to run bundle to install. So just run bundle. Okay, and now once the bundle finishes, hopefully you have your OmniAuth gems added in. Of course, anytime you do that, you need to quit your server and restart it. Okay, now in our config folder, we have this initializers folder, and we need to add a new file in here, and I'm just going to call this OmniAuth.rb. You can really name it anything, but you probably want to name it something along the lines of OmniAuth because that's its purpose. And then what we need to do is we need to add in that client ID and client secret into our code here. Another thing with initializers, anytime we change our initializers, we need to kill our server and then restart it. Initializers only run when the server first boots, so if we change them and we want the server to pick up the changes, we need to do that. Now you add this line here, and right here you copy and paste from GitHub's website your client ID, and then copy and paste in here your client secret. Now we can do that, except we shouldn't check those into our repository on GitHub because somebody might be able to find that, and then they could become us as the application builder. So we really should keep those secret. So Rails does set up another way where we can put in our application secrets, or things that shouldn't be checked into our code repository and are a little bit more secure. So we can run this command right here to edit our credentials, and we're going to use Vim. I've had more success with that than the default Nano editor to edit this file. So once we start off, the first thing we do is we press I to enter into insert mode, which allows us to edit our file. And then we just add a GitHub column here, and then I use 2 spaces. It doesn't like the tab key, so make sure you just use spaces, client ID, and then client secret right here. And instead of just typing gibberish, make sure you copy and paste your client ID and client secret right there. Once you're done, you just press the ESC button, and then Q, W stands for write, Q stands for quit. And as long as it says file encrypted and saved, then you know that you've got those in there. If you get an error message, then you might have done something wrong with your syntax, so run the command again and fix it. Okay, so now after we've done that, back in our initializer, instead of hard coding those values right into our code, we're able to use the Rails application credentials and use our new GitHub that we added in and our client ID, and then also put that comma in there for our client secret right here. Once we've done that, we need to save that file, kill our server, and restart it because this is an initializer and it won't pick up the changes unless we restart it. And now we can test things out by going to our URL and going /auth/GitHub. And now it's redirecting us to GitHub, where we'll need to log in. And now this is weird because we're also the developers of this to-do auth, but we'll pretend like we're some other user. And basically, GitHub is asking the user that's trying to create their account through GitHub if it's okay to give them information about, or okay for us to give them some public data about them. So the user would then authorize this thing right here. And then we come back, and now we're at /auth/GitHub/callback, which is the URL that we put in that callback URL. And of course, Rails doesn't know what to do with that. So that was the redirection to GitHub and the full exchange. And hopefully you were in class and learned all about this. And now we're back in our application, and we should have some information about the user from GitHub. We just need to create their account and save them in the database and log them into our application. The next step is to create a controller that will be able to take the information that we gained and be able to create this user account. So I'm using the generator. I'm going to generate a controller called the Authentications controller. Now let's get a route that will route to this controller. So in my config routes file, I'm going to create a route for that. And it's going to be a GET request. And it was /auth/GitHub/callback. And that will route to the Authentications controller. And we're going to go for the create action because that's creating a new authentication that we can use to log someone in. Now this will work, but if we wanted to do more than one provider, say Facebook, Google, and GitHub, what we can do is we can make this part a variable. So by putting the colon in front of it, that makes it a new parameter variable. So whatever was here in the URL will be in the params hash under the provider name. So that's a way that we can make our URLs variable. We do the same thing with the ID numbers when we do the RESTful routing. So now back in the Authentications controller that we just created, we can add that create method on. And for now, we'll just do something simple. We'll render out some JSON. And we'll just take the OmniOff Gem that we added into this, provides this right here. And provides this in our request environment right here. And this is all the information we're able to glean from the GitHub when the user authenticated our application. So once we do that, let's go ahead and try this again. So up in the URL, we're going to go to auth/GitHub GitHub, like there. And now we did the full Omni or OAuth exchange, and we're able to glean all of this information. Now back in the controller, I've added a couple of private methods. One is just a shortcut, so I don't have to type all of this out right here. So instead of typing all this out when we need it over and over again, we'll just use the auth hash right here. As you can see, that also saves us a lot of time as we go out and we get all the information that I want to keep about this new user. So I'm going to keep the unique ID. So this is something that will uniquely identify this user. And I'm also saving the provider. Now this is always going to be GitHub in this case, but if I decide to add Facebook or Google as another provider, then their unique IDs won't conflict with users. So we can uniquely identify a user by both the unique ID and the provider. I'm also try to pull out the name and the email out of the information that was given back. And I'm also saving this token. I'm not actually going to use this token, but if I wanted to go on and act on behalf of this user for GitHub, say create repositories or something, this token, if I asked for permission, this token could give me permission to interact with GitHub on behalf of this user. So next we need a place in the database to store this stuff. Now there's two options. One option is just to add the information onto the user model. Another option, which I won't show, is to create an own model, maybe an authentications model that will save this, and the users could have many authentications. And that would allow users to create accounts with both GitHub and Google and Facebook, but still be all tied to the same user. So I'm going to do the first way. I'm just going to add the provider, the unique ID, and the token onto the user. So we'll use the generator here, and we'll generate a migration. And I'll call this add authentications to users. And we're going to add a provider and a unique ID and a token. Now it's okay to leave all of these as the default string type, so we don't need to put any colons and types after it. Now back in that migration right here in my app db migrate, Rails was smart enough to know to add these columns onto the users table. So let's run the migration. And add those columns onto our table. So back on my back in my authentications controller, this create action will have two jobs, or two times that it gets called. The first time, if the user is brand new, they come to our site and they click sign up with GitHub. We'll do the OAuth ceremony and come back to this action, and we'll need to create a new user. The other action that will happen is if the user is already signed up, they'll click the sign in with GitHub. We'll do the same OAuth ceremony, and then instead of creating the new account for the user, we'll end up just logging the user back in. And how we're going to do that is since we're going to save the user unique ID and the provider in the database, if that's already in the database, then we can pull that user out and log them in. If they're not already in the database, then it must be a new user, and we'll go ahead and create a new user and log them in. So now I've added this to my create method, and we'll just comment this out. We'll leave it here. If we ever need to debug and see what's in our hash to make sure things are going right, we can uncomment this, and then we can just return. So this will give us a little debug. We can uncomment this and debug, and then we look into the hash and see what's there. But all of this information, all of this right here, first we're going to find a user by the provider and the unique ID that's in the hash. And we'll see if there's a user. If there is, we'll log them in and redirect them. If not, we'll assume that the user is trying to create a new account. So I'm going to add a little helper method to the user to be able to create a new account for this user right here, and then we'll try to save the user. And this little exclamation mark means that if I can't save them, then I should crash. So now let's go look at this new user from hash that I'm going to add on to the user model. So now in the app models user file right here, our user model, I add in this new method, and when in Ruby, whenever you do self dot, that makes the method a static method in Java. So new from hash, we'll pass in this user hash, and we'll create a new user, and we'll use the mass assignment and pass in the hash, and that should set the user's name and email, and name and email for us. Now, the has secure password is going to require us to have a password. Now, this user, the full point of signing in with GitHub is to not have to create a new password. So we need to trick the has secure password into thinking that this user already has a password. So by setting the password digest to something, and I just set it to 0, that fools the has secure password into thinking that this user already has a password, and it will let us save him in the database without actually assigning a password to him. And this right here just makes sure that we return the user in the end. So now we'll go ahead and try this again and see what happens. And now we're back, and we can see that when we tried to save the user, that the email didn't have an @ sign. Well, how come we didn't have an @ sign? Well, down here we can actually do a little bit of debugging ourselves, and we can print out that user hash, and if we notice, my email is nil. Now you might also have a nil name as well. It's pulling this information from my public GitHub profile, and I have hidden my email from my public profile. So that's why the user wasn't able to save. So how are we going to handle this when all the information we're able to glean from GitHub is not enough? And we want all of our users to have an email. So what I'll do is I'll save this information away, and I'll let the user finish creating his account by filling in his email. Now back in my authentications controller, I replaced the user save with the exclamation mark to the normal user save. So we're going to see if we can successfully save the user, and if so, everything's great. Redirect them to the root path, and their account has been created. If that fails, we'll redirect them to the sign up path, which is the same form that they used to create a new account. And we'll just provide a notice, please provide the missing information right here. And we'll also save the hash, or everything that we're able to collect from GitHub. We'll save that in this session. That way we can use that hash on the sign up page to fill in all the information that we have. Now back in my users controller, we have this new path, and we just create a new user. Well, now let's just check to see if there's a user hash in the session, and if there is, let's fill in this new user with the information that we collected from GitHub. So now, if there is a user hash saved in the session, let's go ahead and create a new user from that, and passing in from the hash and passing that hash that we saved in the session. We're also going to do user.valid. What that's going to do is it's going to run our validations, and it's going to highlight the missing, or put errors on the missing fields. So in my case, the email will be highlighted saying it can't be blank. And if there is no session in the user hash, we'll just give a blank user, so they'll get a blank form. So now let's try this out again. Let's go /auth/GitHub. And now we got that notice, please provide the missing information. You notice that it got my name from there, but it says it must have an @ sign. Now the only confusing thing are the password fields. Now, if it's a user that's signing up normally, we want them to have a password. But if they're signing up with GitHub, we don't want them to have a password. So we really need these fields to not be here if they're signing up with GitHub. So what we'll do is back in our model file, that's the app models user file, we're going to add a new password right here, or a new method here that is a method we can use to determine if they have a password or if we should show those password fields. So if the password digest is nil, then they're creating a new account and they should probably have a password. Or if the password digest has not been set to 0, then that means it's set to something else, meaning they probably hashed up a password and the user does have a password. So that's the logic of this method. And now we can use this method in our views. Now in our sign up form under the app views users new, where our sign up form is located, now we can conditionally show these passwords. If they have a password, we'll show them. If not, we won't. And so I just wrapped the password fields in an if statement, checking to see if the user has a password. If he does, we'll show the fields. If not, we won't. Now refreshing this form, we'll see that we still have the user and name field in here and that he must have an email, and our password fields have been removed. So now all we need to do is fix this create method to make sure that we create the user with the information from GitHub. So first we'll check if the user hash is still in the session. Now just a little note, this user hash is it stays in the session until we delete it out. Now flash messages like this notice down here, that shows for one page only, but everything else we put in the session is there until we take it out. So that's why I was able to refresh the new page and still have the information from GitHub, because the information is still saved in the session. So now that we have this, if we have the information from GitHub, we'll make sure that we set up the user right with the information from the form and the hash that we have. So we'll still create the user using that session hash, but then assign the name and the email from the user parameters, and this is what the user submitted from their form. Now if there is not a user hash, then we'll just create the user with all the information he submitted in the form. So we move that up there into the else. And then if we save the user, if the user is able to get saved, we'll log him in and redirect him to the account created. If not, then we'll send him back to the form to try to fix any errors that he might have. And one last thing that we want to do, if we successfully save the user, in case on the small chance that another user goes to sign in with GitHub or try to create an account and they don't sign in with GitHub, we want to make sure that we delete everything out of our session, the GitHub hash, out of our session, so we won't use that if some new user comes to sign up. So we will just delete that out of our session right there. So one last time, I'll try to go to /auth/GitHub. And now we're back here. I have to have an email address. Let's pretend like I accidentally mess it up and I don't type in an actual email address, which it won't let me do, but I can add another email address. I'll just say this is github@slade.com. And now our account is created and we have that. Now we'll log out and now we'll try logging back in. So we'll log it back in with our /auth/GitHub again. And now we're logged back in. Now back in our authentications controller, how that happened is when we ran this SQL statement after my account was created, it found my user and it logged it in. The first time, it didn't find a user with that provider and unique ID, so it went through this route to try to create a new user. The last thing we need to do is just add a link for the users to sign up with GitHub, and put that link on the sign up page and also on the login page. So back on our sign up form, I added in this or sign up with GitHub that links to /auth/GitHub. I also added a similar link onto my login. That's my session's new page. On my login form that says login with GitHub, going to the same URL. So now back at our site, if we see the login link, we can say, oh, login with GitHub right there, and now we're logged in. Now there is one minor bug. If I come back and I forget that I logged in with GitHub, let's say that I try to log in with a password. Let's see what will happen. So my email was github@slade.com, and I'll try typing in a password and logging in. And now we have this error right here saying invalid hash. Well, of course, I didn't create a password for this user, and so my password digest is set to 0, and this is throwing an error. So now in my sessions controller where I log users in, when we do this, call this authenticate method, and the password digest is set to 0, it's going to throw an error. Well, we can catch that error and at least present a message back to the user so that he knows that he might have signed up with GitHub, and he'll know to try that route. So we can recover from the error, and it's called an invalid hash error, and we'll just redirect him to the login path saying invalid password, did you sign up with GitHub? So now let's try that again. It was github@slade.com. And we'll just type in a random password. And now we see, oh, invalid password. Did you sign up with GitHub? And they'll go like, oh, well, maybe I did. They can click the link, and now they're logged in.